Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the show on this Thursday, the 5th of May, 2022. I want to talk about something very, very important, connecting to hyperinflation and productivity. You know, the United States uh, is the biggest central bank, the Federal Reserve. And we have an awful lot of other countries, and central banks right now are all tightening right now. They're going through a tightening schedule. And, as we move toward hyperinflation, it gets harder and harder for the people to become productive. And basically, what happens is people stop working and they start putting emphasis on using the government to support them and financially. And as the hyperinflation gets worse, we're going to see more of this. So less productivity. In other words, you got a guy and say he used to work at a job and it was something productive. Maybe he worked in a factory, and uh, maybe he was building some sort of little tool and die or something, a little small factory. And now he's lost his job during COVID, and he's been on government dole. In other words, government support ever since. And he hasn't got as much money as he used to have, but what the real loss is in productivity. And maybe there's some other people out there, and maybe they used to do productive things in their life, but now maybe they go to the store and things that they need to buy in order to be productive have become so expensive that they just can't afford it. And so they have to look again to the government for government assistance. So you get more and more people that are not working, not being productive anymore, and at the same time the government is trying to support all these people that are not productive, while more people are dropping out of the workforce all the time, while the inflation continues to rise. Now the inflation continues to rise because there's so many unproductive people out there that the costs of goods and services increase. And so that makes inflation continue to rise higher. At the same time, that also makes more people have to drop out of the workforce. So you get a smaller and smaller workforce, less and less productivity, and more people that need to be taken care of by the government. So the government has to send out more and more money to all these people out there who need it, which increases demand, which increases prices. And it's actually a vicious circle, to the point where the government looks and says, all these people out there that we're supporting, we're not going to support them so good, because it's causing more inflation. So we're going to start withdrawing support from them. And then the people start to get upset because, hey, how are we going to feed ourselves? Because the government is starting to withdraw support away. And this is called austerity. And, things like this are going on in places like Great Britain and stuff like that, and other places in the world too, as this austerity is beginning. Then you get massive movements of the people against the governments because the governments aren't supporting them or not supporting them adequately for them to feed themselves. And this is a second vicious cycle that occurs, like a secondary loop. So you got your main feedback loop, which is a loss of productivity in the country, which creates more and more what the government would refer to then at that point as useless eaters. And the reason why the government would be derogatory toward all these people is because then you have an overabundant supply of people who are not productive. And the government starts to realize that actually it's like these are not desired, these excess amounts of non-productive people, but at the same time, the financial system is creating more and more non-productive people in the system, and the government realizes at a certain point that the whole thing's going to just basically melt down because it's non-sustainable. And so, out of desperation, the government says to themselves, hey, you know what? We've got to sustain this system because this system supports us in our positions of power. But at the same time, we've got more and more people who are non productive And the hyperinflation is what's leading to this, but we can't pull out of the financial system that we've created for ourselves. It's an enormous Ponzi scheme because it supports us. So we have to continue, the government says to themselves. But then what are we going to do with all these more and more masses of consumers who are not productive that we're supporting? This is not sustainable. And so it creates these loops or feedback loops within the system that where the government starts to think in derogatory terms about the people that it's supposed to be its contingency. In other words, make up the land, and so they start to think in terms of, hey, what are we going to do with all these people that are more and more, there's getting to be more and more of them all the time, and less workers and less productivity, and we've got to support them because the opposite of that is they'll rebel against our system. And so what happens is the government starts to, these secondary feedback loops start to happen where the government starts to separate from the people and become authoritarian at the same time. It leads to authoritarianism. And it leads to situations involved where the government is looking for ways out. They want to change the demographics, for instance, so that it's more of a plus, more youthful people that are ready to work, rather than people who need more government support, or who are sick, or who are ill, have compromised immune systems, maybe disabled, and so on, that they have to support with all this currency that's depreciating in value almost on a daily basis, and this army of people that the government has to support is growing daily, and the purchasing power of the currency that they're feeding to them is losing purchasing power daily. So what are they going to do? They have to increase the amounts that they send them, and this creates yet another negative feedback loop toward inflation. Where's all this go in the end? What's the conclusion of all this? Is a tragedy. It's almost like the conditions that would come together to make it so that humanity is not in a symbiotic relationship with their governing forces, but in a adversary role with their governing forces. And this is where we're moving. We're moving in this direction toward this hyperinflation, because the currency is all important. Every day people make transactions back and forth, all over the world. Every aspect of the world. It's all about transactions. And you might not realize this, but when you wake up in the morning, and you just turn on your computer and stuff, you're making a transaction between you and your internet provider. It's going to have to be paid for at the end of the month. And every time you pick up your phone, they're the cell phone company's going to have a bill for you. And everything is a transaction. The food you eat was a transaction that was made at the grocery store or whatever. It's just all transactions all the way through your life. Money is a part of everything. And, when you've got a problem or a Ponzi scheme in the money, this is where it leads in the end. It leads toward a division between government and the people, where the government's not for the people anymore. In fact, they look at the people as an adversary to them. And ultimately, the people, in the end, don't see this. They don't see this. The government will see this far ahead of the people out there. But they're not going to come out and tell the people, hey, you know what? We got a problem with you. You eat too much, you consume too much, and you don't work any, and you're not productive anymore. And the amount of people that's doing this is growing exponentially day by day. They're dropping out of the workforce. The system has been corrupted. And, oh, by the way, we, the government, we're at fault for this because we created a Ponzi scheme back in 1914 that's been running until now, and it's bound to blow up in the end. All Ponzi schemes do. And what's going to be the negative effect is, and how do they get out of this? They can't get out of this. They're stuck. The government's stuck because they're stuck with the currency the way it is. Because if they try to do some sort of a reset or change things, they're going to blow up the system. So, I mean, we're going in circles with all this. But this could have lasted a lot longer if we hadn't had the COVID crisis, which has actually exacerbated or increased the speed in which this demise is coming, this demise of the fiat currencies, and the problems it's going to generate with it. There's no easy answers, guys, but what I'm doing is I'm making you aware of the situation that's involved. Thank you for listening to my show. Like and subscribe. I know this is a lot of information to take in really fast. You might have to watch the show a couple times to really nail it what I'm talking about. But when you do, when you nail it, you say, hey, you know what? Glenn's right. There's going to be a division between the people in charge and that are supposed to be for the people. And ultimately, they're going to be against the people. And the reason why is the currency is going to force them into that position to protect themselves. So the government ultimately, and all the people who are in the positions of power, are going to have to protect themselves ultimately from the people. The people are going to have to protect themselves from them because they're a danger too. They get their finger on big red buttons. You know what I mean? And they've created weapons that are unbelievable in their power and intensity. And at the same time, they also have they're lawmakers. They can put these laws in arbitrarily overnight. And basically, well, you saw what they did to us during COVID. They just push a button in the system and bam, we're on lockdown. We can't even leave our homes. You know? And this was the beginning of the end when they started to do that. Because the ramifications and what they set in motion now is a growing thing that they don't know how to stop it. They don't know how to stop it. And any one of them can't stop it. But there's going to be more and more people that aren't working, and more people are going to need support. And ultimately, where does it lead in the end? Because it's not sustainable. You cannot run a system that way. You have to have productivity within the system. Somebody has to produce the food that you eat. Somebody has to bring the gasoline to the pump that you use. Somebody has to do this and do that. And you think that they're going to do it? The people within the government, all they're good at is making rules. They're not going to do it. And eventually we're going to get to the point where the structure of this system is not providing enough for all the people. And you think the people are going to lay down and say, hey, that's okay, we're going to starve to death? You think that's going to happen? I don't think so. We'll catch you guys in the next show. Bye-bye.